This is the New Way Young Adult Podcast. New Way is the young adult ministry of Franklin Heights Church. This podcast is a sermon from our Wednesday night gathering, and we pray that God would use it in your life as you navigate these young adult years. Such a powerful story because it feels very real. You know, this is not a story, as you've seen as we've gone through, that started off with victory. This is a book that started as a funeral. Loss, confusion, disappointment, and a future that completely fell apart. Naomi lost her husband, then her sons. Ruth loses her husband. And then by chapter 1, neither of them are walking into a promising season. They're walking through grief and carrying questions that they cannot answer. And yet, from the very beginning, Ruth's faith never fully wavers. That doesn't mean she had everything figured out. It doesn't mean that she wasn't grieving. It doesn't mean that she wasn't scared. But even in the uncertainty, she keeps moving toward God instead of away from Him. And I think one of the most overlooked parts of Ruth's story is this. Ruth's faith was personal, but it was also influenced by who she surrounded herself with. Because even though Naomi was broken, even though Naomi was grieving, even though Naomi had moments of bitterness and pain, Naomi never completely fully let go of God. And we can't miss this, because if Naomi had walked away from God in chapter 1, Ruth probably would have never met Boaz in chapter 2. Who you surround yourself with matters more than you think. Your community, it shapes your perspective, your decisions, your standards, but most importantly, your community shapes your future. And some of you are trying right now to build a healthy future while constantly surrounding yourself with unhealthy voices. People who normalize compromise, pull you away from conviction, feed your worst habits, and only to show up when everything is easy. And you cannot be fooled. Look at this. The people closest to you are helping shape the direction of your life. The people closest to you are helping you shape the direction of your life. And this is what makes everything so powerful, because Ruth did not have a perfect community. Naomi was grieving. Boaz had not even been in the picture yet. Nothing was easy, but she stayed connected to people who kept moving her toward God instead of away from Him. Because faith and community together can shape an entire future. And now we come into chapter 4. After all the grief, all the waiting, all the uncertainty, we finally get to see what God was doing through this entire process. So if you have your Bibles, we're going to be in Ruth, starting off in Ruth chapter 4, looking at verses 3 through 6. You got to understand, last week, Ruth went to Boaz knowing that he could redeem her out of the situation. And he realizes, she gets there, and Boaz, being a man of integrity, says, I can do that. But there's also someone closer that has that right before me. So he sends Ruth back to Naomi, full of grain, full of food. And Ruth now goes into this waiting process. So throughout chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, you're seeing Ruth go through every single step. And in chapter 4, it switches perspective. Now, Ruth is kind of out of the picture, and we kind of focus in on what Boaz is doing. So it says this in chapter 4, looking at verses 3 through 6. It says this: Then he said, being Boaz, he went down to find that redeemer. He went to find that person. And just like how we talked about last week, how in the Old Testament there was the law to put in place on how someone needed to be redeemed. It was very specific. And Boaz goes and does the exact thing that we talked about last week and puts it into process. He went, he gathered the elders, he gathered everybody, and he finds that one redeemer while he's waiting at the gate. And he confronts him and says this. He says, then he said to the redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here, in the presence of the elders of my people. And if you will redeem it, he says, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you. And he said, the man, the redeemer, he says, I will redeem it. Then, this is so important, because notice this, we'll talk about this. Notice this, that Boaz didn't start this conversation with this man saying that Ruth needed to be redeemed. He starts off with a piece of property that could bring this man profit. And this man goes, yep, I'm ready to do it. And it says, then Boaz says, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Point one is this: you have to be willing to step up. You have to be willing to step up. What is going on here? Like I said, Boaz has done everything in practice. He has gathered the elders. He is bringing the closest kinsman redeemer. He's handling it publicly, and he's giving the opportunity for redemption first to the nearest relative. Everything that we talked about last week. And watch and see how wise Boaz is here. He's doing everything the biblical way, so nothing can be misinterpreted. Boaz does not immediately say there's a woman that needs redemption. Instead, he starts off with the land. There is a property that's available connected to Naomi, and in that, you have the power to buy that land from her, to give her wealth, to give her a future. And immediately the man says, I will redeem it. Again, you have to remember what's going on. We're in the book of Judges. There's famine. So people are looking for land to be able to plant more grain. Grain right now is just on a high end. So this man goes, if I have more land, I can make more food. If I have more food, I can sell it. I can make a profit. He says, because at first everything looks profitable to this man. It looked beneficial. It looked easy. But then Boaz adds the full weight of responsibility. He says this: with the land also comes Ruth. With the blessing comes commitment. With the reward comes responsibility. The thing is, this man, he wanted that reward, but he didn't want the responsibility. He was quick to say yes, but then when he saw the weight of everything, he began to think about his own interest. He goes, well, I didn't know that, and I really don't want to compromise anything on my end. The idea looked like gain, until he had to sacrifice had to be attached to it. You know, a lot of us love the idea of influence, relationships, leadership, success, ministry, marriage, purpose, until you realize the weight that comes with each and every single one of those things. Everybody wants the aesthetic of a good life, but few people want the responsibility that's required to build one. And our society has given instant gratification, emotional convenience, avoiding hard conversations, leaving when things become costly. But see, in this chapter, something is exposed. Character is revealed when responsibility arrives. And when responsibility came to the Redeemer stepped away. Some people want the marriage, but they do not want the sacrifice. People want the ministry, but not the consistency. People want the influence, but they do not want integrity. People want success, but they do not want discipline. People want community, but they do not want accountability. But the future you want will require you to step into responsibilities that you cannot avoid. Your calling is not proven by what excites you. It's proven by what you stay faithful when everything gets heavy. My sophomore year in the spring, I played soccer, and we went through tryouts. I want to give you a backstory. I wasn't planning on sharing this. Well, it was fun. I love soccer. My 9th grade year, I tried out for the JV team, and I was pumped about it. And I remember like halfway, if you ever tried out for sports, you kind of looking back, you kind of know if you're not going to make it or not sometimes. You may, or unless you're really convinced you're really, really good, and but that teaches their own. But I'll be honest with you, I thought I was doing like really, really well. Even the coach sat me aside and he said, hey, when the season comes up, I really think you'll be good in this position. Have you ever played in this position before? I'm like, no, well, let's go through the rest of the tryouts and you try this. And anyway, after every practice, he began talking about the future with me and everything. So back in the day, I don't know if they do this anymore because people are really weak, but they used to take, if you made the team, they put it in the hallway. And you had to walk up there. So no one ever gave you a phone call or anything. So you had to walk up there. I remember walking up with everyone, and I walked up there. I looked up and I went, and my name wasn't up there. And I went, so I sat there. No, I sat back and I just kind of walked away. And I went to the bathroom and I cried. I'm going to be really honest. I cried. I called my dad in the bathroom on my Voyager phone. I remember that. I missed that phone. Anyway, I called him. I was like, Dad, I didn't make it. He goes, my dad, I love my dad. He goes, well, you told me all week that the coach was talking to you about things. Did you misinterpret that? I'm like, no, I didn't. He goes, well, Taylor, you must have because you didn't make the team. I'm like, okay. And I hung up. And so my dad picks me up from school. I'm like, Dad, do you think there's a mistake? And my dad goes, Taylor, they don't make mistakes like this. You just probably didn't do as good as you thought you did. And that's okay. That's okay. There's always next year. So I get home, and I'm sitting on the couch like depressed. And my phone rings, and it was one of the guys that made the team. And I'm like, I really don't want to talk to him right now, so I didn't answer it. And then someone else from the team called, and I picked it up and I answered the phone. And it was the coach. He goes, I have to apologize. I forgot to put your name on the roster. Can you imagine going all day long like that? And he goes, can you make it back for practice? I'm like, I'm already at home. So anyway, we'll see you tomorrow. So anyway, that was the back. I don't know really why I wanted to share that. But anyway, that was fun. So next year, it was fun going into tryouts. Going in my 10th grade year for tryouts, they pulled me aside before tryouts. And they said, hey, you made the team. We just want to make clear about that. I'm like, that's fantastic. Didn't want that to go through that again. But they said, hey, we would like you to be captain this year. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. And they sat down and they're like, do you understand really what a captain does? I said, yes. I said, at the beginning of the game, I walk out in the circle by myself and get to talk to other plans. And, they say heads or tails. I get to come back. And he goes, okay, let's sit down for a second. A captain leads the team. He said, a captain leads the team in victories, but also you carry the loss. And he says, whether, Taylor, you win or whether you lose, we're going to meet every game to figure out what could have been done better. He says at tryouts, he goes, we have to run. They do the things called 60s. You know what 60s are? 60s is when they put you at the corner of the field and you have 60 seconds to run the perimeter. And if you make it in the first try, you're done. If you don't, you do it again. And he said, Taylor, we have, because they had a lot of people trying out that year. He goes, we're going to have to do 60. We're going to have 3 groups. They're going to have to start off and run. And he goes, as a captain, you're going to run in every group. And here's the thing. I know you're a captain. He goes, but we're not announcing this until tryouts are over. He says, lead without giving out the title. And so I had to go through tryouts the whole, I threw up a lot. Anyway, it was miserable. But I learned that a captain is not always a glamorous thing. Sometimes it's hard responsibility. Sometimes it was staying after practice, working with the person on the bench so they could be able to play in the game. It was taking the responsibility for the losses. It was making sure when we won, I elevated the people that did a great job. And here's the thing. Everybody wants the title of captain in life. But a lot of people do not want the responsibility that comes with it. Everybody, this quote says this, everybody wants the reward. Few people are willing to carry the weight. Everybody wants the reward. Few people are willing to carry the weight. Your future will not be built by avoiding responsibility. It will be built by stepping into things that other people run from. And sometimes the responsible thing, and you got to understand this is important too. The responsible thing is not stepping into something, but also the responsible thing is stepping away. And right now in your life, you have to realize that what is the responsible thing for you to do right now? Is it stepping into that relationship? Or having wisdom that relationship is not healthy and you have to step away? Is it learning to set better boundaries with your mom and dad? And we've talked about this story. This is a weird age where you're becoming more independent. There's times where you're kind of coasting on mom and dad. Is it time for you to step back and I have to take control of my own life? Is it time to step away and to mute all the voices that are telling you different things? And then I have to step into what God is telling me to do. And that might be requiring stepping away from relationships that are constantly holding me back. Sometimes stepping up is stepping away from something. And in this moment, Boaz does everything right. And this man steps away. And again, you have to understand this. This is not just 2 people having a conversation on the street. He has brought the elders, the tribe. People are watching all this publicly go down. And this man says, no, I will not redeem her. I'm stepping away. And here's the thing too. You have to understand this. This wasn't law. It's not like the guy got stoned afterwards. This wasn't forced. A kinsman had the responsibility, but they also could walk away from that responsibility. Boaz could walk away from this responsibility as well. But here we go. We see this in Ruth 4, 8 through 10. It says this, so when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Also, Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife. to perpetuate the name of the dead in its inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. Point 2 is this: redemption brings dead things back to life. Redemption brings dead things back to life. After the closest redeemer walks away from the responsibility, Boaz steps forward publicly before the elders and makes a declaration and says, I will redeem her. And in this moment, everything has been built up in this moment. Everything in this moment, everything changes. What has looked forgotten gets chosen. What looks abandoned gets pursued. What looked like a dead future starts to breathe again. And you cannot miss the weight of this moment. Ruth was a widow. Naomi's family line was finished. Their future looked empty. The security had been stripped away. But Boaz steps in and redeems what everyone else assumed that was over. And what I love about this is where it becomes a powerful picture. Because Boaz is not the only man in Scripture who steps towards brokenness instead of away from it. And one of my favorite stories in the Bible comes from the book of Hosea. And Hosea chapter 3, verse 1 through 3, Hosea was commanded by God because Israel was prostituting themselves to foreign gods, mixed marriages, all these other things that were going on. They left and abandoned God. And God instructs Hosea the prophet to go marry a prostitute. And that prostitute, Gomer, abandons Hosea. And in verse 1 it says, Then the Lord said to me, Go and love your wife again, even though she commits adultery with another lover. This will illustrate that the Lord still loves Israel. Even though the people have turned to the other gods and love to worship them, so I brought her back for 15 pieces of silver and 5 bushels of barley and a measure of wine. Then I said to her, You must live in my house for many days and stop your prostitution. And during this time, you will not have sexual relations with anyone, not even me. When you place Ruth 4 besides Hosea 3, the contrast is powerful because on the surface, these women are two completely different people. Ruth is faithful. Gomer is reckless. Ruth stayed. Gomer wandered. Ruth's suffering came through loss that she did not create. Gomer's suffering came through sin that she participated in. And yet, and here it is, and yet both stories end with the same theme: redemption. And that matters because it shows us something massive about the heart of God. Look at this. Sometimes life breaks you through the pain that you did not choose. Sometimes life breaks you through the decisions you did choose. But redemption is still possible for both. That's why you can't reduce these stories down to a woman that just needed a man. If you read these stories, if you go through Ruth, if you look through Hosea, if all this comes to you and to say this is about a relationship of a man just redeeming and marrying a woman, you've missed the point. This is not scripture teaching that women need to be rescued by men. This is scripture revealing that humanity itself needs redemption. Boaz and Hosea are shadows pointing towards Jesus. That is the point. Because in both stories, someone steps towards brokenness when they had every single reason to walk away. And the closest redeemer in Ruth hears the cost, he backs out. But Boaz steps up and takes the responsibility. In Hosea 3, God literally tells Hosea to go and buy back his unfaithful wife. Think about how shocking that is. Gomer had walked away. She had wrecked her life. She was trapped in sin. Most people would have said that was her choice. She deserved it. Let her stay there. But redemption pursues everyone else abandons. Redemption pursues what everyone else abandons. And that's where the gospel explodes in these stories, because Boaz and Hosea are giving just a glimpse of Jesus. Jesus did not redeem perfect people. He redeemed broken people. And some people are broken because life crushed them. Others are broken because sin consumed them. And Jesus moved toward both. Toward the faithful hurting Ruth and toward the wandering Gomer. And towards us all. Some of you relate more to Ruth. You've tried to stay faithful. You've tried to honor God, but life still hit hard anyway. Others may relate more to Gomer. You knew better. You ran away. You compromised. You got stuck in things you never thought would control you. And the good news of the gospel is this: God's ability to redeem is bigger than both your suffering and your sin. God's ability to redeem is bigger than both your suffering and your sin. You're not beyond redemption because life fell apart, and you're not beyond redemption because you messed it up yourself. That is why this story is so much bigger than just relationships. This is about a God who steps into the impossible situations and says, this is not dead to me. This is not too broken for me. This is not too far gone for me. And understand this right here. Whether you were wounded by life or been wrecked by sin, redemption is still available. Whether you've been wounded by life or wrecked by sin, redemption is still available. We live in a society that throws things away when it stops being easy. The world says if it's difficult, you need to leave. But biblical redemption moves towards brokenness, not away from it. And some of you tonight feel like Ruth, overlooked, disqualified, exhausted, ashamed of your past, convinced certain parts of your life are too far gone. But in this last chapter, it reminds us God specializes in restoring things people assume that are dead. Somebody in this room has been living this story over and over and over. And some of you believe that your story actually is over. But if God can redeem Ruth, if God can redeem Gomer, then God can redeem you. This book closes in 14 through 15. Boaz goes back, breaks the news to everyone. He marries Ruth. And it says they conceive a child together. And in verse 14 and 15 it says this. It says, then the women came of the city and gathered around. This is so important because you got to see this. All up to this point in the story, we have talked about Ruth's redemption. Even Naomi has set everything up. Look, I got a plan for you to get out of here. She wasn't thinking of herself. She was thinking like, Ruth, there's still a chance for you to be redeemed. I mean, God does even something more incredible. It says the women, it says they didn't gather around Ruth. They gathered around the Naomi and said, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer. And may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be your restorer of life and nourisher of your old age. For you're a daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. And this is so important right now what happens here in point 3 of this. Your story is bigger than your current season. Your story is bigger than your current season. This is so awesome. So what happens is Ruth and Boaz have a baby, and what they do is incredible. They come and they give this child and they place it in Naomi's arms. And Naomi took the child and laid it on her lap and began his nurse. And the woman said, a son has been born, not of Ruth. A son has been born to Naomi. What they did was Boaz didn't just redeem Ruth. Boaz and Ruth conceived this child and laid it in Naomi's arms so the lineage could continue. She thought she was done. She thought she was giving Ruth a new life. But what God was doing, he was also redeeming Naomi this whole time. Something that probably people did not expect. And what's so cool about this, it says they named him Obed, and he was the father of Jesse, who was the father of David. God worked this whole entire tragic situation not just to bring forth David, because we all know in the lineage of David comes the Messiah, the King. What looked lost to us, God was working out the gospel. Your story is bigger than your current situation. Ruth and Naomi, they were just trying to survive. When the story started, they were grieving, broken, uncertain. Widows in a foreign land with no guarantee things would ever get better. But then you look in verses 14 and 15, the women begin to speak over Naomi. Praise to be the Lord, whose day hath not left you without a guardian redeemer. He will renew your life and sustain you in old age. See that phrase, he will renew your life, because we got to remember, Naomi entered the story saying, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, meaning call me bitter, because she thought her life was over. She thought everything was final. The grief had won. Her best days were behind her, that God had forgotten. But by the end, it reveals something powerful. God was still writing the story while Naomi thought the story was dead. And now the same women who walked into Bethlehem empty are holding not just the future, but the future of the world in their hands. What died in chapter 1 is breathing again in chapter 4. The blessings was bigger than Ruth and Boaz just getting married. That child, the grandfather line of King David, who ultimately points to Jesus. While Ruth was just trying to survive a Monday, God was shaping generations. Most people only evaluate life based on a current moment. If it's hurting right now, God must not be working. If I don't understand it, it must be pointless. If the timeline is slow, maybe I missed it. But this book teaches us that God is doing generational work in seasons that feel ordinary, painful, and slow. The decisions you make right now matter more than you think. The habits you normalize, the people that you surround yourself with, the compromise you entertain, the faithfulness that you choose, the prayers that you keep praying, the consistency that comes with no applause, it all shapes direction. But your life will always spill onto other people. Your obedience affects future relationships, future children, friendships, your witnesses, people watching your life quietly, generations you will never meet. You are having an impact even if you don't realize it. Ruth had no idea her faithfulness would echo into the lineage of the Messiah. And some of you have no idea what God may do through one faithful season where you refuse to quit. Listen to this. You may think you're just surviving a season, but God may be shaping a legacy. You may be thinking that you're surviving a season, but God may be shaping a legacy. God was writing the redemption the entire time. And maybe that is what someone needs to hear tonight. Just because you can't see what God is building doesn't mean He stopped building. This wasn't the plan. Now, honestly, this is where many of us are living at right now. Ruth didn't plan to become a widow. Naomi didn't plan to bury her husband and sons. Boaz didn't plan to carry this responsibility. None of them would have written this into their own personal story. And maybe that's why this book hits deeply. Because some of you walked into this season carrying the same thought. This wasn't the plan. This wasn't the plan for your family. This wasn't the plan for your mental health. This wasn't the plan for your relationship. This wasn't the plan for your future. This was not the plan for your life. But Ruth reminds us something powerful. Just because life didn't go according to plan does not mean that God stopped working. Through every chapter, the grief mattered. The waiting mattered. The faithfulness mattered. The obedience mattered. The heartbreak mattered. The uncertainty mattered. God was using it all, even when they could not see it. And in that is the gospel. Because if you just look at the cross itself, it can look like that wasn't the plan, but it was always God's plan. The disciples thought it was over. Hope looked buried. Darkness looked victorious. But what looked like defeat became redemption. And that is what God does. He takes things that look dead. He takes things that are dead and breathes life back into them again. He takes broken stories and rewrites them with grace. He takes grieving people and restores joy. He takes sinners and calls them redeemed. That's why tonight some of you need to stop interpreting your current chapter like the book is already finished. Ruth thought she might just try to be getting through a season. Naomi had it figured out that everything was over. But God was building a lineage that would bring Jesus. And if God can do that through widows, through grief, through loss, through famine, through uncertainty and brokenness, He can still work in your story as well. God is still great. When life falls apart, when the future looks uncertain, when prayers feel delayed, when grief feels heavy, when you cannot see what He's doing, because His greatness is not dependent upon your circumstance, it's always dependent upon Him. And tonight, as we enter this time of worship, may it look different. Have the faith that Ruth did right in the beginning. Not when everything planned out. Not when her plans didn't go anyway. She said, let your God be my God. So in this season, are you going to let God lead you even though you don't know what the next step was? Even though your plans crashed, are you going to let God redeem it? Or are you just going to stay there and miss out on what He could do with your life? Maybe tonight the worship is simple. God, this wasn't my plan, but I trust you with the story anyway.